All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to VCCLive Episode 1. My name is Kevin Skipper, and this is my co-host, Jay DeLuco. We also have Nick Green, Grim Green, as he's commonly known throughout the vaping world. He is at a convention in Las Vegas this weekend, so he couldn't make it actually for Episode 1, the inaugural episode, but he will be back joining us next week live at 12 noon. I don't know, should we go through this, Jay, and just maybe introduce who we are just really quickly and what we do and how long we've been vaping and stuff like that so people get an idea since this is our first show?
Yeah, absolutely. You start.
All right. Well, I'm Kevin Skipper, as I said, and then I started vaping in February of 2013. I was a 15-year pack and a half a day smoker, and my friend Alex actually introduced me to electronic cigarettes, a little small ego batteries with a CE4 clear miser on it. I had tried a couple years prior to that, like a year and a half prior to that, with the CigAlikes from Enjoy. They were at the gas station in the town where I lived at the time, and I just wasn't digging it. Didn't work for me. 24 milligram e-liquid that was leaking constantly in my mouth and stuff. So anyway, I eventually went back to smoking within a week, and then got in the. So I'm just going to give you a brief journey through how I got into it. And so after that, Alex and I started a brick and mortar shop in Tampa, Florida, which is where I'm from. And in October of 2013, I had the idea to do a vaping convention that kind of traveled around to different places and exposed new markets to vapor products to hopefully get more smokers off of combustible tobacco and help change their lives like mine was changed by this incredible product. So that's kind of a really brief, and I'm also shortly thereafter as well, being a politically involved person, I saw that there was a need for advocacy at the state level. So I started Vista Truth, with the help of Dimitri Agrafiotis, and his smoke-free association model kind of worked well at the same time that he was developing in Tennessee with what we were doing with Vista. So we now have Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, and Massachusetts, which is where Jay is from. Mm-hmm. And with that segue, I'll let Jay tell us a little bit about himself.
Sure. I've been vaping since October of 2010. My first kit was an Ego kit, and as soon as I opened the box, I quit instantly. I quit smoking instantly. But probably about 6 months to a year after that, I started making e-liquid, obviously first for myself and then for friends, and then that just kind of built into a small business. So I've been doing that for 5 years plus. Also, I've been heavily involved in advocacy, as Kevin probably knows. Pretty soon after I started the business, I started working a little bit with CASA. Certainly contributed to a lot of national organizations, the AVA. And more recently, I was a founding member of the Massachusetts Smoke-Free Association, which, as Kevin said, is kind of under that Vista umbrella. And we've been working diligently in Massachusetts to aid in defeating bad legislation and maybe perhaps putting forth some good legislation.
Very cool. So you guys kind of have an idea next week. I'm sure Grim doesn't need an introduction, or Nick, excuse me. He's been around for quite a while in the vaping industry, has quite a bit of a following on YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and stuff like that, and Facebook. So everyone pretty much knows who he is, I think, at this point. So why VCCLive? I just want to kind of give you an overview. I see a lot of vaping shows, and they're spreading information, some of it good, some of it not. But I do appreciate the fact that people are caring enough about this product in this industry to get involved, which is one of my hashtags. You'll probably see it over there on the screen, get involved, because we have to do something to save this industry from regulation by the federal government and state and local governments. But the primary objective right now is the federal government with the FDA Deeming regulations that came out on May 5th and published in the Federal Register on May 10th that go into effect on August 9th. It's at the end of the 90-day period. So a VCCLive is going to be a no-nonsense. We're not here to make jokes or have fun or do giveaways. We're here to tell you about serious issues that face our industry and what people who are currently smoking combustible tobacco products will lose if we don't win this fight. Some of the stuff that we're going to say on here, again, everything is our opinions, as you saw in the disclaimer that we have up at the beginning. There are opinions only. We're not talking for any organization. We're not talking for any company. We're talking from ourselves. And you might not agree with some of it, and that's okay.
And we might not agree with each other.
And we might not agree with each other, and that's okay too. So how we evolve is through discourse and sharing ideas, and that's what we want to do with you, the people who are watching this either live or on the replay. We want you to learn something and go do something with that knowledge. So that's the whole purpose of doing VCCLive. That's why we're doing this every week until I don't know when, until we see some change in this industry, because the way things have been going over the last couple of years, not good in my opinion. So that's why we're doing this.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement there. Not much good has come out of regulation to this point.
Correct. And we want to find out what we've been doing wrong as an industry. So we're going to ask some tough questions, and we're going to have some honest answers that maybe not everyone will like. But you know what? The truth never lies. So we're going to try to get there. We're going to try to find out what that truth is. We're going to try to come up with a strategy and keep this product around, because us as vapors, we know everyone watching this, hopefully there's some smokers watching this. I don't know, maybe someone will share it with somebody and say, hey, did you know about this product that's available, or at least for the time being is available in the United States, that can help you live a smoke-free life. So anyway, with that, we're going to get into the first topic that we had for our show notes, which is the FDA Deeming regulations, of course. And I want to play something for you guys. Well, this kind of goes along with, I don't know, maybe should we talk about what happens on August 8th and beyond first, Jay? Or I want to play this clip, but I want to play the clip probably when we're talking about where we're at now. So
I would play the clip first, I think.
Play the clip first. Okay. So why did I put this clip here, and why did I queue up to this particular part? This is the House Appropriations Committee from April the 19th. And they're discussing the Cole-Bishop Amendment, which we'll talk more about in just a minute. But I want you to understand as vapors what the ideology and the irrational, I don't even know if that's a word, irrationalism? Irrationalities?
Irrational nature?
What we are facing as an industry by people who are elected to represent us in Washington, D.C. I want you to take a listen to this really quickly here. And this is our first show, so I'm not too familiar with the program that we're using, so I don't know if I need to mute this or whatever, but I'm going to play this. And I want you to listen to this congresswoman out of Florida. I'm a little embarrassed to say that, but her name is Debbie Wasserman Schultz, I believe. And this is her speaking in opposition of the Cole-Bishop Amendment, April 19th.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to the amendment, and for several simple reasons. It would seem to me that the only reason that this industry exists and that e-cigarettes exist is, it's nice to hear that there are some who believe, although we don't have data to attach to that they have been able to eliminate their addiction to cigarettes through using these products. But the reality is that the purpose of this industry, the purpose of the development of this product is to keep people addicted to nicotine. And then to bring up another generation of children who will be addicted to nicotine and who will become addicted to nicotine in a much more, quote, benign way because of the way these products are marketed. Many of these products are actually manufactured in China, a country that certainly does not have our standards of consumer protection, and that we essentially have little to no way of knowing what goes into them or what standard is used to develop them. Here are some things that are part of the warning to vapor train users. And yet this amendment would actually make it harder for us to regulate this product. Nicotine is highly toxic. Nicotine is very addictive. Danger of serious damage to health. Very toxic by inhalation. Very toxic when in contact with skin. Very toxic if swallowed. May cause sensation, irritation by skin contact. Do not use if you are pregnant and or breastfeeding. It may cause harm to the unborn child. Vapor from e-liquid may cause irritation to eyes and skin. Vapor from e-liquid may cause drowsiness or dizziness. E-liquid is very toxic to aquatic organisms. E-liquid may cause long-term adverse effects in the aquatic environment. In case of contact with skin, wash immediately and thoroughly with soap and water. In case of contact with eyes, rinse immediately and thoroughly with water and seek full medical advice immediately. In case of an accident, or if you feel unwell, seek full medical advice and show this information to your doctor. Both container and e-liquid contained within must be disposed of in a safe way with due care to both man and the environment. Use appropriate containment for your e-liquid to avoid environmental contamination. Sounds like a really safe product to me. One that certainly, why do we have any regulation of this product? Because, if we're comfortable that this is a product that our children should be able to use, and judging by the flavors that we refused to regulate last year, I just, as someone who has lost a number of members of my family, mostly everyone who I've lost in my family died of lung cancer. And if we don't think that this product is designed to hook kids on nicotine and keep people already addicted to nicotine addicted, then we are sticking our heads in the sand. And we should allow the FDA to move forward with their regulation and also study this product before, Dr. Harris, with all due respect to your medical expertise, before we move forward with the use.
Now, I realized that was a long, clip, and it took up, probably 3 minutes or maybe a little more than 3 minutes. But Jay, what do you think about that?
Well, what's most disturbing to me is the fact that this is the head of the DNC. She leads the Democrats. Now that's, I'm speaking about the party itself, right? So what she's saying there is essentially policy. That's going to be the policy of the Democrat Party. Where is she reading these warnings from? That's what I want to know.
I think she got it from Vapor Train, whoever that is. Maybe it's a company or an organization, or it's not an organization. Maybe it's a company that they print them on their labels or something. I'm not sure. But I just wanted to mainly.
So that's a company looking to cover their butts.
Right.
And overstating.
Dramatically overstating.
Right. Warnings for contact with e-liquid. To me, that sounded more in line with a DIYer handling 100 milligram nicotine than it did personal use e-liquid.
So here's where I differ greatly from the people who are on the other side of the THR fence, like Miss Wasserman Schultz. Nicotine is not killing smokers.
Right.
It's not. Tar and the other chemicals in combustible tobacco are killing people by the hundreds of thousands, millions worldwide every year. If you can sleep at night as an elected representative and consciously make the decision to vote against or discourage the use of products that are at a minimum 95% less harmful than combustible tobacco, shame on you. Why are you in office?
Right.
You're not a representative of the people, and I'm so glad she's not in my district, because I'd be at her office weekly, if not daily. Mm-hmm. And some people I don't think you can reach. I don't think she would be someone who we would put a lot of stock in, hoping to come over to the THR side and the vaping advocacy side. It's ridiculous that she's had people, admittedly, in her life, loved ones, lost to lung cancer. I'm assuming she didn't say, but I'm assuming from smoking combustible tobacco. How can you not understand what we're trying to accomplish with the vaping industry?
Mm-hmm. Now, to a certain extent, a lot of what we're seeing here is just human nature. Whether you're a politician or not, you tend to believe the first thing you hear, right? And who are the first people that are going to get the ears of politicians? It's going to be the pharmaceutical industry. It's going to be, money coming from big tobacco, however that actually takes place. So that's what these people are believing is through all the lobbying efforts over the last 3, 4, 5 years, we're seeing the repercussions of that now. That's what the politicians believe, because that's what they've been told. Having a handful of people come into their office and say, vaping has saved me, isn't necessarily going to change their mind. So to a certain extent, what we're seeing here is just human nature.
But wouldn't you say, Jay, that they have a duty even higher than we do as
they absolutely do.
Citizens of this country? Don't they have a duty, a higher standard than we have to educate themselves before they pass or vote on legislation that's going to impact the public health?
They absolutely do. They absolutely do. But that's not to say that they're going to do that. I'm not making excuses for them.
Right.
Certainly,
No, absolutely. I understand.
certainly. I'm just trying to understand where these attitudes come from, and I firmly believe it's not because they necessarily want people to continue dying from smoking. It's because these are the people that are in the back rooms whispering in their ear.
Well, it doesn't matter what you want. It's what's a fact. And that's what her attitude and her mentality and those of her colleagues are going to get us. People are going to die,
Right.
continue to die as a result of her poor knowledge and poor judgment.
Right. So,
And that's despicable.
we need to be louder
We do.
than those lobbyists that are speaking in these back rooms. We needed to be louder 3 and 4 years ago, and 5 years ago, and 6 years ago.
We're going to get to that in a little bit.
Right. So,
all right. So, just to, and I'm not going to, this isn't going to be a political show, though we are going to speak a lot about politics, because I just don't, I like politics a lot. In fact, I would say I have a passion for them, but some people are just like hands off. They don't want to touch anything to do with politics. And I never understood that, because politics controls every aspect of your life, whether or not you know it. It does. And I think a lot of people, a lot of vapors and a lot of small business people in the vaping industry who maybe weren't as connected or involved before with politics are starting to realize that now, just how much it affects your everyday life. But I wanted to show this really quickly here. This is something I just saw yesterday that came out from Senator Ron Johnson. He's a Republican from Wisconsin. And I was just going on about the political aspect of it, where it's not going to be a political show, but politics do play a huge role in it. And for some reason, I'm not sure why this is, it seems like Republicans are supporting the vaping industry far, far more than the Democrat Party is. I'm not sure why that is. I have my own suspicions. And one of them is, I believe that Republicans' main core values are less government interference and more personal freedom. So it's nice to see, it's refreshing to see some elected officials in the Republican Party who are actually committed to that standard. And here's a letter that was written by Senator Ron Johnson, Republican, Wisconsin. Again, he is the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, and he sent a letter to the FDA Commissioner, Dr. Robert Califf. I'm assuming I'm saying that correctly. And he's raising some concerns about the FDA deeming regulations. So here's some of the contents of the letter, and you can find this online. I don't know if I can. I'll post a link to it, I guess, in the replay if anyone's interested in where I got this from. But there are a few key points in here. You can read the entire thing later. Again, we're not going to go through it verbatim, but I think that he makes some extremely valid points. And I hope that more elected officials will read this, and they'll have a light bulb moment and say, you know what, this man is right. Why is the FDA overreaching and doing what they're doing? What I feel is outside their role. I don't think that what they're doing right now with the FDA deeming regulations was the legislative intent of Congress when they passed the Tobacco Control Act and the Family Smoking Prevention Act. So anyway, that may be some of the grounds for some of the legal proceedings that some of these people have filed lately. But if you look here, it says, the final rule notes that the FDA does not currently have sufficient data about e-cigarettes and similar products to fully determine what effects they have on public health. Further, the final rule states comments were divided on the safety and toxicity of e-liquids, e-cigarettes, and the exhaled aerosol. Will the FDA issue a revised rule if there is sufficient data that finds that e-cigarettes are safer alternative to traditional cigarettes? Please explain. First of all, I don't think they will.
I think we actually already have the answer to that.
Right.
But he's somewhat being rhetorical here, brilliantly so.
Brilliantly so, absolutely. I think that the reason you're absolutely right, because we do have Public Health England, we do have the Royal College of Physicians. If you don't know what we're talking about, Google those. You'll find out some information. If I find any links, again, I'll post it in the below. But yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that somebody in a position of authority to make the FDA say these things is making them say these things, because I want it on the record more so than their. I don't know, Jay. We haven't decided yet. Is this going to be a cussing show or a not cussing show?
I'm all for cussing.
All for cussing. Okay. So in their bullshit explanations, when they have hundreds of pages with comments that were made during the comment period for the deeming regulations, Almost every single one of them that I read said FDA disagrees, and then they went on for a couple of paragraphs explaining why they disagreed. I want them to explain this and the rest of the letter to Senator Johnson, who's in a position of power and has every right to ask this, and he gives his legal basis for being able to force the FDA to answer these below. And the second one is, how is the FDA's regulation of e-cigarettes not a premature restriction on an industry given the FDA's admission that it does not have sufficient data about e-cigarettes to determine the effects on the public's health?
This is brilliant because he's using their own verbiage against them.
Correct. I love it.
Yeah, it's great. It's great because we all know this is a de facto ban, but the FDA refuses to use the word ban, which, as most of us know, that's politics. It's all in the language that you use. So he's calling them out.
Yeah.
Using their own words. So kudos to him.
And then just a few more little things here. Some stakeholders claim the FDA's rule on e-cigarettes will stifle innovation and result in the closure of many small businesses that create and sell e-cigarette products. Did the FDA determine how many e-cigarette businesses will be affected by the rule? If not, why? If so, please provide the data.
And they can't. They can't.
They can't. Exactly.
They can look at Wall Street. They can look at the heavy hitters. They cannot count the small businesses. Now
Right,
they were able to get my email, my personal business email. How they got that, I don't know, but I can't imagine that they're able to do that with the tens of thousands of businesses across the country.
That leads me to the question that I had next in our notes. Does the FDA truly understand the scope of what they're about to do? What do you think, Jay?
I don't think they care. I think the more damage they can do at this point, the happier they'll be. The more consolidation they see in the industry, the happier they'll be.
To what end? Why?
Because it's a lot. Look at big tobacco. It's a lot easier to control and coordinate with 3 or 4 major corporations than it is 10,000 small businesses.
And you think that they've placed that ease of regulation above the best interest of the public health?
That's their method of operation.
Yeah, I agree with you. Unfortunately, and I think it's a sad day in the United States of America when this is a reality. It's disgusting. Mm-hmm. So what do we do about that? We need to change that. And how do we accomplish doing that? If you don't know, the FDA is an administration that was created by the executive branch of the government. Theodore Roosevelt, I believe it was, a long time ago, created the FDA, and they can only do what the law tells them they can do. And the law is either made by precedent in courts or by Congress and signed into law by the executive branch. So, and that's one of the biggest cop-outs that I saw in the deeming regulations. And also every time I hear Mitch Zeller, who is the director of Center for Tobacco Products, every time he speaks, he's saying, our hands were tied.
Right.
I mean, we don't blame us. We can only do what the government told us to do. Mm-hmm. And as much of a cop-out as that is, he's right. So what do we do about it?
As far as the predicate date,
as far as the regulating of the whole industry, which again I think goes beyond the scope of what the legislative intent was originally.
Well, I mean, the like you said, case law is the idea that they don't have to be that specific as to what they are and aren't allowed to do. They can just throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks through case law. So that's it. That's what we're facing right now.
Right. So what the way around that is an act of Congress.
An act of something. Yeah. Something.
And that's getting to
something by Congress that can be a little bit more specific and put more restrictions on what the FDA can and can't do with respect to vaping or anything else.
And that's getting to the crux of why we're doing VCCLive, because again, I posted this the other day on my Facebook wall. I've been saying for a couple of years, I saw as soon as I started vaping, actually probably a couple months later, and I saw what was happening, and the FDA deemings were in their very early stages, and there wasn't even open to public comment. We didn't have a draft. We didn't have anything. Mm-hmm. And I understood at that moment that we need congressional intervention for a long-term permanent solution to this problem that we're facing right now. And I kind of blame myself, and I don't know if anyone else recognized that, or, I mean, I don't have a huge outreach, don't get me wrong, but I blame myself for not being more vocal about it. I should have been more vocal a couple of years ago, because there are things that vapors and businesses should have been doing for the last couple of years that we have neglected. Some of that falls on, I guess, trade organizations that did not have the right strategy in place. They're the ones who the companies are looking to for direction, but also not just that, but the vapor, us ourselves as vapors, we should have been contacting, and when I say contacting, I don't mean just sending an email is cool, but these people have district offices that are usually no more than 30 minutes from where you live. They should know you on a first name basis. If they have any questions about vapors rights or e-cigarettes or vaping, you want to be knowledgeable yourself, so educate yourself, but then you also want them to be able to call on you when it's time if they have questions about it. So this is some of the things that we have failed miserably at over the last couple of years, and we need to get our asses in gear and change that.
Yeah, it goes back to what I said earlier. The first people that legislators were hearing from were big tobacco, big pharma. We didn't have a voice, and that's probably true of any new industry, with a known adversary, which we have. The legislators are going to listen to the first person who's talking to them, especially if they have a big piggy bank. And unfortunately, 4 or 5 years ago, we really didn't have that. We didn't have the organization. We didn't have the money.
Well,
so this is where you and I maybe disagree a little bit. I think that 4 and 5 years ago, we didn't really have the resources. We didn't have, a strong leadership voice where we do have those options now.
Certainly over the last 2 years, would you say?
Yes, that I would absolutely agree with you.
And if we would have started 2 years ago, some of the things that we should have been doing that we haven't as an industry. Have you ever heard of a vaping PAC, Political Action Committee?
No.
I have not.
No.
And I realize, trust me, I'm in advocacy every day, and with Vista, it's very, very tough struggle to get money.
Yeah.
And I think with what we've had to work with, it's not been terrible, but I think aspects of it have been really bad. I mean, we should have had a political action committee started a couple of years ago or more, building, getting in money, donating to campaigns, getting bipartisan support from both parties, both the Democrats and Republicans, so that when we are ready to pass this legislation that will hopefully at some point reclassify vaping products completely away and separate from tobacco products, which is what is required to save this industry. We would have been in a position to do that. We are not in a position to do that right now. And I don't know. What do you think about that, Jay?
I agree. I think it almost seems like any effort we put forth now is too little too late. Barring huge consolidation of the industry, it's tough. It's going to be a huge uphill battle.
It is going to be a huge uphill battle, but I don't know if it's too little too late. It is definitely too little. I don't think we're too late yet. Why I say that is
there are some things that can happen now, or within the next few months that could absolutely turn this truck around.
Yes,
absolutely.
But time is of the essence.
Absolutely, yeah. It's time to get off your asses.
Time to say someone else is going to do it for me. Vaping businesses, I'm talking to you right now, is gone. No one's going to do this for you.
Right.
You might have seen some lawsuits filed recently, and we'll talk about litigation as part of the overall strategy in just a minute. But that's only a small part of the strategy.
The advocacy community used to ask for 2 to 5% of your annual income if you're a retailer or manufacturer or what have you. You know what? You missed that boat, so now it's time for 10%. You guys are gonna have to put up.
You know what the FDA wants? 100%. They want you gone.
They want you gone. They want you gone.
So where are you going to be when your doors close? And I understand for some people it's a money grab. Good riddance. Bye.
Right.
But for those of you who are serious about sticking around to convert the other 40 million people who are going to die from combustible tobacco over the next 20 to 40 years, pony up.
Mm-hmm.
It's time. We need money.
Put up or shut up. I mean, if you hear about, a vape, your local vape shop is just reposting CASA calls to action, ask them whether or not they're donating resources, whether it's time or money.
Yeah.
Ask them what they're doing.
And one of the excuses I hear on the state level anyway a lot is we're cash poor. You're going to be more than cash poor when the FDA Deeming regulations put you out of business.
Right.
So anyway, I think we exhausted that. People need to, you need to, everybody who's interested, even if you're not a vapor and you're watching this, if you're a smoker, if you're a family of a vapor, change someone's life that you know, contact your elected representatives. And again, I had a post on this the other day, and I'm just going to expound upon it for a second. Every one of your elected representatives, right down to the city council, county commissioners, mayor, state elected representatives, they all know each other.
Right.
And who do you think has a better shot if you're intimidated by or can't get in to meet with your congressperson? Start local, because I promise you they know them, and it's going to be a lot easier for you to meet with your county commissioner than it is going to be to meet with your congressperson. But you can get your foot in the door somewhere, and everyone who represents you in any way, shape, or form needs to know your stance. And first of all, be educated, please. Be respectful, be patient, but make sure that you are doing this now.
Yeah.
So, all right. We're going to go on to our second point that we have. Advocacy organizations and their roles, who to support. I get this question quite a bit. We kind of touched on it just a second ago.
This is a hot button issue on social media.
I feel like if you say something the wrong way, people are going to ostracize you. And, I think that we can be critical while being truthful at the same time. Mm-hmm. Again, I understand that there are budget limitations, and a lot of the work, a lot of the people that I know that are doing consumer-related work are doing this for no pay. And that is the, CASA, for instance, CASA.org, the vaping militia, those guys, they don't get paid for doing what they do. They volunteer their time, they volunteer their energy, their efforts, except for Alex Clark, who was, I think, a welcome addition. Freudian slip. A welcome addition to CASA as their legislative director, and he does a fantastic job in that role. Why do you think, Jay, over the past 4 years, so many thousands of companies have made so many billions of dollars, and our advocacy groups are struggling with funding?
I think it's mainly because of the youth of the industry. A lot of our industry is, a lot of these startup businesses are owned by 20-somethings. Whereas if you look at big tobacco, you look at pharmaceuticals, you look at these large entrenched industries, they've had the capital for decades, if not longer, and they understand that legislation is just part of the cost of doing business.
Well, I know there are some, though. It's not all. I know that there are some 20-somethings that have pretty successful businesses, and they are being responsible. I think it took maybe a couple years to get to that point, but they are being responsible.
Absolutely. There are exceptions to every rule, but by and large, this industry is still in its infancy, and I don't think much of the industry really understands that government relations and public perception is an enormous part of what needs to be done.
Do you think they understand better now than they did, say, 2 weeks ago?
I think they're maybe a little more tuned to it, but what their reaction will be is a different story. A lot of these people, like you say, they're just in it for the quick cash grab. So they're just saying to themselves, all right, well, I guess it's going to be time to get out soon.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, if you're listening to this, and or maybe someone can share it with you, the replay later. If you are new to the business world and new to the political world, please understand that these advocacy organizations are out there busting their ass on your behalf. And if you're not going to do it, the very least you can do is give money. The very least you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all as individuals, whether we're in advocacy or not, we all have to identify our own strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
And if you don't have strength in sitting down with a politician and voicing your concerns, give money to somebody who does. Give
Right.
money to somebody who holds the same views as you do. It's not that hard.
And so there's been a lot of talk lately about divisiveness in the community, and I don't know. I think that it's a tough, another tough issue to discuss and talk about, but something I think that needs to be discussed and talked about. I wish. Well, first of all, I don't think it's possible for everyone to work together. I know that everyone has differing opinions. The leaders of different organizations have different motivations for why they do what they're doing. I wish it was all altruistic and everyone was, let's get smokers off of combustible tobacco and eradicate the combustible tobacco cigarette. Unfortunately, I don't think that's what it is. I think egos get in the way for sure. And this is just absolutely not the time for that. I mean, we don't all have to. Dimitri says this all the time too, and I don't want to sound like I'm copying him, but he makes sense when he says it. It's we don't all have to hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but we have to realize that we're not the enemy of each other. We're all fighting for the same thing. Hopefully, for whatever your motivation is, if it gets the vaping industry to stay around, screw everything else.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of Dimitri's 80% rule.
Yeah.
I come from software, which when implementing any software package, you say if we can deliver 80% of what the consumer is asking for, that's a win. And the same is absolutely true when looking at advocacy organizations. You're not going to agree with them 100% of the time. It's just not feasible. And that's true whether you're looking at CASA, whether you're looking at the AVA, whether you're looking at SAFADA. You need to find the organization that is most in line with your views. And if you can get to 80% with any of those organizations, you're in a good spot.
Don't you think, though, that it's the onus is on the leaders of these organizations to reach out to every single organization available?
Absolutely.
If it takes sitting down in a room,
find common ground and
common ground. Stop the bullshit because we're going to pay the price for it. That's my point.
Yeah, lead by example. Hashtag.
Absolutely. And another thing that's been I've been seeing a lot of talking about, and I was on Vapors Live last week and I discussed it, and I don't know if I can remember exactly what I said about it, but it's the HR 2058 versus Cole-Bishop Amendment discussion.
Yeah.
I want to make a few things perfectly clear to people right now. HR 2058 is a bill that was put out by a Republican from Oklahoma, Tom Cole, last year. I think it was April of 2015 or sometime around then. It's gained a lot of Republican support for co-sponsors, and I think there were 54 at last count with a couple more coming on board. I finally talked to my representative here where I live to join as a co-sponsor, but also the Cole-Bishop Amendment, which is a more recent occurrence. So HR 2058 would have codified some of the changes that we need long-term for the vaping industry. Unfortunately, it does not have bipartisan support. And a few points about that are this. Even if it did have bipartisan support, the FDA's position, because I sat in on the media call a couple of weeks ago, the day after, I think it was on May 6th, they had a media call, Q&A session with the FDA. And one of the reporters asked them their thoughts on changing the predicate date. And the response was they are absolutely and unequivocally opposed to it, and so is the administration. So let's say, for instance, HR 2058 tomorrow got 50 Democratic co-sponsors as well, and it was a huge bipartisan victory. and it passed. It flew through the House and the Senate, and the bill came to President Obama's office for him to review and sign. He's going to veto it. That's the position of the administration.
Mm-hmm.
So while it is good to support HR 2058, I think everybody needs to understand and be aware of the fact that we're supporting it at this moment so that we can use that at some future point for legislation that may come out hopefully within the next year, and hopefully with a new administration who's more open to the vaping industry. What are your thoughts on that, Jay?
I agree wholeheartedly. Unfortunately, this is how politics works. It works much through obfuscation. So people don't fully understand, okay, yes, if in a perfect world, 2058 would be fine. But there are procedures and processes that go behind every single bill. Just because somebody says HR 2058, maybe we should spend a little less time on that, doesn't mean that we don't think it's a valid bill. Of course, I think I can speak for Kevin and myself in saying that 2058 would be a great bill. Unfortunately, it just doesn't have a chance to pass.
Right. So when something's not going your way in strategy, what do?
You do the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, right.
I'm kidding. I'm
change
kidding.
strategy.
Right.
You have to. What Jay just said is the definition of insanity.
Yeah.
We don't want to keep banging our head against a wall. We do want to support HR 2058. Okay? Is that clear? But understand, it's never going to become law. We're going to use it in some future strategy to hopefully get those co-sponsors who are on board to work with some of their counterparts on the other side of the aisle so that we can develop language to have something that's going to be able to go through both the House and the Senate and be signed by whoever the president is at the time, which, by the way, if it's a Democrat, kiss it goodbye. It's probably not going to happen based on their history and track record with vaping legislation. So, Donald Trump, don't like him, don't like his point of views. I think he's misogynistic. I think he's egotistical. He's a narcissist. He may be slightly sociopathic. You know what? He's pro-business.
In theory.
He's a multi-billionaire from business. I would.
We shouldn't go too far down that road.
I'm not gonna. If I have to, I've said it before and I'll say it now. If I have to become a single issue voter for this purpose, because this is the most forefront of my mind right now, is saving vaping in the United States, so that hundreds of thousands of people per year will not die from smoking. Everything. I mean, what else is there really? I mean, if we can stop that one thing, if we can prevent that one thing from happening, it's a huge win. It's a huge win.
Yeah.
So anyway, the whatever legislation we come up with in the future, it needs to have bipartisan support, and using HR 2058 to leverage that at some point in the future is why I say support HR 2058 now.
Right.
But the caveat will always remain: understand that it's not going to pass. It's just not. So understanding that, Representative Tom Cole worked with a Democrat from Albany, Georgia, Representative Bishop, and they developed some mutual language, which I will. We kind of skipped over the where do we go now, what happens on August 8th with the FDA Deeming, but I'll show you guys just really quickly, and you can read this other thing in a minute. But I'm going to show you really quickly here the language of the Cole-Bishop Amendment, because some people are saying, and I erroneously said on Vapors Live last week that it was not a permanent solution. Apparently, the wording for this is permanent. So this did pass a huge hurdle a couple of weeks ago.
I think the delineation between a permanent and a permanent solution and something that's just a Band-Aid is the fact that it would still hold all innovation at a standstill.
Either one would, yes, but with changing the predicate date, obviously, at least we get to keep the products that have been on the market for the last nine years.
Correct.
And for instance, even if that process doesn't change and the PMTAs are still required for new products to come to market, at least they'll have something better to compare them to. Because as it stands right now, under the FDA Deeming regulations, there is no substantial equivalent product, and there is no PMTA. So I believe that, like everyone else has been saying, it is a direct prohibition on vapor products. There is, I think, less than 1% chance that any product is going to get through the SE or the PMTA process.
Yeah, certainly looking at what's happened in the past.
Correct. One PMTA approved in the last 5 or 6 years, was it? Out of thousands submitted, and tens of millions of dollars went into those PMTAs, and one passed.
Do you know which one that was?
I do not. I honestly don't know.
Okay. Right, neither
I
do
haven't looked it up.
I know.
Honesty, I'm going to tell you. If I don't know, I'm going to tell you I don't know.
No, absolutely.
But I know that's
the right answer. I do believe that snus, a Swedish snus, may have actually gotten passed as, what do they call it? Not substantial equivalence, but modified risk.
Modified risk category.
They may have actually gotten that, which would be a huge win. For tobacco harm reduction, but that has nothing to do with vaping.
Before we go back to the Cole Bishop, so the predicate date change is to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to give us time to implement a different strategy. Something we should have been already, like I said, as an industry, as advocacy groups, should have been working on already for the past 2 or 3 years. So what we're trying to do now is play catch up and find some way to change that date from February 15, 2007 to August 8th, 2016, so that we can get our act together, get our asses in gear, and do what needs to be done legislatively. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, it's a tourniquet, but it's incredibly important in the short term.
Incredibly. I don't think that can be stated with enough emphasis. So I'm going to go back to this really quickly here. So the Cole Bishop Amendment would change that date, and that's what all this stuff here says. And then there are a few things in here that Jay and I went over this the other day, and I asked him because he hadn't seen this language yet, because there are some people saying that there is some verbiage in the Cole Bishop Amendment that they might not necessarily agree with. And so let's see.
I actually have some notes here.
Did you take the notes on that when we were going through it?
I did. I think first and foremost, the thing that most people are aware of is that the Cole Bishop Amendment changes that predicate date.
Correct.
From that 2007 number to August of 2016.
Right. And then there's some language here that talks about the Secretary of Health and Human Services establishing product standards for vapor product batteries.
Right, which are as of yet unset. So we don't know what those safety standards would be. Presumably, they're just talking about batteries exploding in people's pockets, that kind of thing.
Right.
A big
again, I don't have a huge
presumption.
problem with that. And again, I want to preface this whole discussion with the fact that it's either Cole Bishop passes or we lose everything.
Right.
So which keep that in mind when you're weighing what the options are right now.
Right. So it changes predicate date, sets battery safety standards. Granted, we don't know what those standards will be, but again,
there will be batteries.
There will be batteries. Compare that against no batteries. It also bans print advertising in non-adult media.
Correct.
And there are ways to differentiate between adult media and media that may not be targeted towards non-adults. Mm-hmm. Vending machine restrictions, which most states and municipalities have been facing that restriction for years.
Right. This just adds vapor products to that.
Right. Labeling requirements, which it's tough to say whether these would be added to or in place of the deeming regulations, but none of them really seemed outlandish to us if you can pull up the specifics there.
Yeah, the phrase "keep out of reach of children," the
Right,
phrase
which-
"underage sale prohibited,"
Yep, not
and
a
an
problem.
accurate statement of nicotine content.
Yeah, which we already do.
Right. So, okay. So I asked you the other day when we were discussing this. I asked you as an e-liquid manufacturer and as an industry representative, do any of those things are any of those things so bad that you would say I can't support Cole Bishop in light of the fact that it would change the predicate date and
Right.
keep the last 9 years of technological advancements around?
When you look at what Cole Bishop does compared to what the deeming regulations do, it's a no-brainer. We go here. The only devil we don't know in this is the battery safety standards.
Right.
I don't 100% trust legislators to legislate battery safety the way I think it should be regulated. So there's some issues there without knowing what specific
Well,
regulations.
this would be the Secretary of Health and Human Services, not even an elected official. But still,
Right.
still, keep in mind, we'll have something on the market,
Yes.
and
Yeah,
we can work on standards, and we can also, like I said, continue
And
to work
get-
on
and-
legislation.
Yeah, because we'd be getting in at the ground floor at that point.
Right.
We have a target. We know who to talk to with regard to battery safety standards. We would have a voice.
Well,
in
rule
theory.
number one in negotiations is have a seat at the table.
Right.
If you don't have a seat at the table, you're not negotiating anything
Right.
with anyone. And if Cole Bishop amendment does not go through this agricultural appropriations bill, which has it's still not a slam dunk. I want everyone to understand that. Even if it gets through, there's no saying there's no saying that it's going to happen. It's going to actually materialize. It's got a long process still to go through, and it has to still be signed by the president. But I think it has a much, much better chance with bipartisan support than if it was just. So last year, Representative Cole attempted to get something through as well in a similar fashion, and it didn't have any of these other caveats in there, and it did not get past anything. I mean, it died, it stalled, it's gone.
Right.
So he realized he had to go back to the drawing board. And I think any good politician worth their weight knows that you have to have bipartisan support. It just makes sense. So the 2058, Cole Bishop, support them both, but realize that 2058 is not going to go anywhere. It's more of a long-term strategic plan to support that. Cole Bishop is something that needs to be passed soon in order for us to buy some time to continue to work on legislative strategies. So there's also so that was my next point. We need a unified long-term strategy consisting primarily of legislation. Again, going back to political action committees, I don't know enough about them, or I would have started one. If anyone's listening that knows anybody that maybe is in a different industry that runs a PAC or works for a PAC, please have them get in touch with me. I'd be interested to talk to them about what we can do to start something like that for the vaping industry immediately. And it needs to be well funded. There are guidelines on who you can contribute to and when and how much and stuff like that, which I understand the surface, but I don't understand all of it. So we definitely need somebody. There's got to be someone out there who knows how we can get this operating and how we can start getting bipartisan support through political action committees. And I think it would be beneficial as well to already have some legislation written that we can propose, because it's easy to go to your congressperson and say, I think you need to pass legislation. We need to save the vaping industry. It needs to be reclassified. And they're going to say, okay, what's your suggestion? What are you going to hand them?
Right.
So
you need
we
to be able to hand them potential legislation.
Him or her, excuse me.
Yes.
Yeah, so we need to be able to hand them a draft of something that says, this isn't perfect, but this is what we suggest. Does anyone have that in the vaping industry right now? No.
And where do you think the deeming regulations came from? Who do you think actually wrote them? Do you think it was the politicians?
No,
No.
it was not. It was attorneys who work for the FDA, most likely.
Or attorneys who work for the tobacco industry.
Or attorneys who work for the tobacco industry, right. So we need to have something that we can present to them, and that's another one of the things that we're severely lacking on in this industry. why are we not thinking about this stuff, and why are we not doing it? I think to this point, I would have seen something if we had some draft legislation, but it's just pretty difficult to go to someone in a leadership position and ask them for help, but not be able to provide them with any suggestions on what you want for the help. So we need to have something that the vapor industry as a whole can come to terms with. Doesn't have to be, but we have to have something to present,
Right.
and say this is what we would like to see. And I'm sure we can do that. Positive, we can do that. So we need to have something like that drawn up that that we can come to an agreement on from a unified perspective. And then we have litigation. There's been already a couple of lawsuits filed, and I think some trade organizations are going to, definitely going to be filing theirs. Litigation. So I come from a legal background. I am not an attorney. I did go to law school. I was a circuit civil mediator in Florida for 4 years before I got involved in the vapor industry. So I do understand how it works, and I do understand the chances of success. It's 50-50 every time you step into a courtroom, even if you have a slam dunk case.
Yeah.
So
there are too
let's
many
say
things that can go right or wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So let's say we do have someone that's filing a lawsuit on behalf of the industry or company has a slam dunk case. Are we going to put all of our eggs in a basket of something that may or may not succeed? And furthermore, even if it does succeed, I want you to have a look at this really quickly here. This is one of the key phrases that I outlined when I was reading through the deeming regulations. So even if litigation succeeds on some point, the newly deemed tobacco products may be subject to future regulations that FDA determines are appropriate for the protection of public health.
Yep.
Let's say we get an injunction. Someone gets an injunction to stop the predicate date and to stop the process until there can be a further review. Or the court just flat out tells the FDA the deeming regulations, which they have a severability clause in here. So even if they tell them one point of it is not valid, it doesn't invalidate the rest of the document. Okay,
Right.
First of all. So let's say, for instance, we get that injunction. They can go back and craft new language that circumvents the court's ruling and reissue it. And then we're at square one with litigation again. This is why I'm trying to get the point across now, and I will be preaching this as much as I can to whoever will listen from now on out. We have to have a long-term legislative strategy. The only thing that's going to stop this from happening in the future, the only thing that's going to stop the FDA from changing the rules to their own game as we go along, is if we have Congress who is above the head of the FDA. They tell the FDA what to do, to tell the FDA, this is what you're going to do, FDA.
Now, with an injunction, I'm genuinely asking this question because I don't know the answer. If there were an injunction, would it be possible that all of the dates would be pushed forward? Because that's what a lot of people in the industry and the community were saying.
It depends on what point.
Up to this point.
Yeah, it depends on which. I have not read the lawsuit yet, so I don't even know on what grounds. I mean, I've seen some.
I
some
believe
stuff.
The NicoPure lawsuit is specific to labeling requirements. I could be wrong because I haven't read it either. But I believe
and I think
it was on
that,
First Amendment grounds.
There's another one I just saw that came out too that has to do with challenging the FDA's authority. Again, going back to kind of what I said, which is a good legal argument.
Mm-hmm.
About
so I don't know
the legislative intent. So what was the legislative intent?
If the courts
Congress
decide that there's validity to the case and they allow it to go forward, does that de facto create an injunction that prevents the FDA from enforcing the rest of the deeming regulation? I guess is my question.
Ultimately, it depends on, again, this is why litigation is just, it's so hit or miss.
Yeah.
You don't know what the court's going to decide and rule on what point. We can't plan the long-term future of an industry in the United States of America on maybes.
Right.
We can't. So we have to we should have a long time ago come up with some strategy, and I'm sure that the advocacy groups that are out there have both in their repertoire. They're going to be working on litigation as well as legislation. But again, I've been around in this for 2.5 years. I've been fairly active in advocacy for most of that time, and I have not seen a solid legislative plan yet from anyone, except for maybe some state level stuff. But anyway, we're getting close to the hour. Do you think we should go over? You think because we still haven't talked about state and local? We can
I think state and local we could cover a whole show by itself. So
Okay.
if you want, we can push that till next week.
Yeah, and hopefully next week Nick will be joining us live, and we definitely can get some of his. I just want to say this really quickly about the states and local. Don't sleep on the states. Don't take your eye off of the ball. Unfortunately,
Right.
there's a lot of balls in the air right now, I was going to say, which is kind of funny. But we need to keep our eyes on all of those things, okay? Don't sleep on the states. There's a lot of stuff happening in the states right now, and I think they're going to try to use this time with the FDA deeming regulations being out and our focusing on one thing to slip some stuff through in the next legislative session next year. So Jay, you want any final thoughts?
Yeah, just a little bit of house cleaning. Thank you all for joining us. We had some pretty good activity going on in the chat the entire show. I know Kevin's actually not able to pay attention to it because he's busy actually producing the show. So I've been paying attention a little bit to what's going on in chat. I appreciate all the participation, and I want you all to know that going forward, we are going to try to address questions that are going on in chat. This is more of a podcast format show. So there are some hurdles centered around that, but we are going to try to address what's going on in chat going forward. So hope to see you all again next week, and invite all your friends.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a Facebook page. Make sure you check it out, like it, share it. I was bulk adding people before I realized. I thought I was inviting people, and I didn't want to be that guy, so I stopped at 309. And but anyway, share it if you like it. Share the video, share the replay. People need to get this information. Vapors need to get fired up. They need to get involved. No one's going to do this for us. That's the bottom line. We have a great show for you next week. We're going to start off with and talk about state and local level advocacy, how it intertwines with what the federal government is doing. Remember, you don't have to do everything. You do have to do something. Get involved. Right.